Hi again, we are here again. Fascial stretch, fascial release, fascial fitness, fascial hydration, fascial manipulation, fascial distortion, fascial biotensegrity. All these buzzwords and terms are just used to confuse you and probably extract money out of you on the basis of something happening to fascia. This week I got a question from someone who was understandably confused by all the courses promoting changing or addressing fascia, in particular around movement. And I can understand why so much confusion arises. The question was, what movement really does affect my fascia, and can one movement or movement regime influence my fascia more than another? Stick around for the science bit of this argument, by the way, as it's very cool and logical. But let's start with the idea that any one movement is going to affect fascia more than anything else, or that fascia can be targeted by certain movements or treatments, as we've already discussed, as against any other movement, is just manipulative and simply biologically, physiologically implausible. Let's be clear. Every time I move my body in any way, shape or form, I'm moving my fascia. If I'm cleaning the windows, playing basketball or wiggling my fingers, I'm moving my fascia. All movement is fascia, and you can't breathe or even sit up without it coming into play. The claims of these things changing neural tension and so on and so forth is just ridiculous. In any case, neural tension does not come from fascia at all, but from lower motor neuron. That's another story. Ask me nicely and I'll tell you. Let's go back to the principle of fascia and what it is, which is simply a connective tissue. The clue is in the name. It connects things. The nature of connective tissue is that it connects one thing to another thing. It doesn't connect anything to itself, and that's really, really important to remember. It doesn't have any inherent tension, which I mentioned before. Fascia connects skin to fat, to muscle, to bone. It's continuous, but it isn't a structure, a tissue as such, or a thing in its own right. And so to suggest that you can do something to it in some kind of mutual exclusivity is just bonkers. I'm often also surprised by the hypocrisy of some of the people that are pushing this stuff, the fascia obsessors, in what is kind of feeling like it's becoming almost like a cult. Many of these people will be the first to criticize, as will I, the classical anatomy and call it reductionist. And yeah, it's a model that focuses on the shoulders or parts of the body or systems, generally quite often an exclusion to others, and doesn't put it back together. And it's a problem that's been around for 300 years. It reduces functional consideration and eliminates body-wide understanding, and I'm always on about it. But the same thing is happening with this sort of crazed obsession around fascia, focusing single-pointedly on one bit of tissue and thinking that somehow it's more important than another. So let's again be clear. If I move my body in as many ways as possible to the end of its range, perhaps I add some loading and some resistance, some aerobic activity to increase my heart rate, and I will do this regularly, then my fascia is being given everything it needs. That there isn't any specific fascial stretch, manipulation, or type of movement that is going to affect my fascia more than any of this stuff I've already mentioned. Now, you might want to go and learn specific ways of moving and stretching, and that's fine. But don't let anyone kid you that this is going to be any more fascial than any other kind of moving or stretching, simply because it isn't. I don't know, how about fascial woodwork, fascial hanging the washing out, fascial playing with your dog? Just sticking the word fascia in front of it doesn't make it fascial. The same way you might want to learn a way of rubbing or poking somebody to help them move better and have less pain, and you might go on a course to learn this, but you won't be learning to rub or poke fascia any more than you'll be learning to summon the spirits of Atlantis and grow wings. And if someone tells you that's what you're doing, then they're just making stuff up. About both of that, let's be clear. Atlantis and the wings would be cool though. There's an important thing to remember about fascia as a connective tissue, which is that there's a line for us between stability and stiffness. So strong fascia is found in areas where lots of stability is needed, or certainly the thicker portions of it are. You'll find these areas around the lower back in particular, the area of the thoracolumbar fascia. And this is probably where it's at its thickest of anywhere in the body. And the reason for this is that the lower back is where we need stability and force transmission more than anywhere else. It needs to have forces push through here and it needs to protect vulnerable areas. And this strong fascia is going to extend downwards and across into the gluteus maximus. It's going to move around the abdominal area as well, and it's going to support the spine and the sacrum. In the thighs and leg, again, stability is needed here. You need stable legs. So as a result, you'll like to find the thicker sheets of this aponeurotic fascia in those areas. As we go up the body, this gets thinner, and we find that the areas around the shoulders and the chest have thinner and the less fibrous sheets of fascia, and with then stronger bands around the neck and the head where we need more stability. So we're constantly walking the line between stability and stiffness. We need to be stiff to be upright, but we get too stiff and the problems really start. Fascia is an inert and mostly non-cellular structure. Now, it's got thousands of fibers in different layers going in millions of different directions, and they all have one thing in common, which is that they rely on fluid moving in and around and through them within these hugely compressed spaces, and they need this in order for them to stay mobile, even when they're stiff, as in keeping us upright. So the key element to these areas is mobility and movement in and through them on a regular basis. Where there's lack of movement, there's going to be that potential for an increase of stiffness, and where there's lots of thick tissue, the potential for this stiffness to appear is much more readily apparent than in areas where there's less, and also where there's more movement. We've got lots of thickened tissue around the mouth and tongue, but it doesn't get stuck in the same way because it keeps moving. Well, mine does anyway. The lower back has lots of requirements for us to be stable, and therefore there's going to be lots more fascia than you'll see in most other areas. Tension is very different from stiffness, and it doesn't, tension doesn't come from fascia or anything else. And as I mentioned, it's a lower motor neuron issue, but that's another story. But in any event, stop moving, and in particular, stop things moving your lower back. Stop squatting, use a chair too much or lots, and generally don't wiggle your butt too much, and you'll see the potential for stiffness arising in this area, simply because it's got lots of fibers related to stability that will become more easily stiff. There's a logic to this.
Not exactly rocket science.
But remember that none of these fibers are there independently, but they're connecting structures to the lumbar spine, to the muscles, to the lower back, to the pelvis, and connecting the pelvis to the rest of the body. Fascia doesn't have a job outside of connections, and it doesn't exist independently to anything else. It's utterly useless in and by itself. The whole principle of any kind of training or focus, or even conferences that focus on this bit of connective tissue, seem a bit retrograde. I need to emphasize that I am not saying that the treatments offered under the guise of fascia aren't good or don't have good outcomes or results for people. And I'm sure that the same thing goes for the movement sessions. I'm not dissing them in any way, shape or form. And I have no doubt that they would be worth learning and be really enjoyable. Are they primarily working or affecting fascia? And the answer is no, absolutely not. We've been moving around for thousands of years when we didn't know about fascia. Yes, it's a poorly described tissue, and there's certainly some interesting things to be learned from the study of it and other connective tissues, but I think we might have reached peak fascia, or at least I certainly have, and there are lots of other poorly described tissues that we haven't even got to yet. Pick one. So you might think it's harmless, but the main problem from my perspective is that when people focus on something like this, the tendency is to create a raft of narratives and stories that are just simply untrue and biologically suspicious, BS for short. This then reduces our standing as therapists within a scientific or medical community, who simply just laugh at the obsession over fascia and the daft claims that arise as a result. Science takes a back seat here, and I recently submitted a spot-on proposal to a fascia conference in the UK on a study of myofascial continuities on the lower limb based on dissection, study and considering anatomical and functional assessment. And guess what? It was turned down, presumably because it wasn't scientific enough and I wasn't playing Mozart to it. Fascial resonance is now a thing. This kind of thing isn't new, of course. Lots of old cobblers about, burning belly fat, detoxing, taking horse medicine for viruses. This stuff's been around for years, mainly peddled by people looking to make a fast buck. And sometimes a story is more attractive than the evidence when it's dressed up nicely and panders to your agenda, whether it's politics or health. And perhaps, the realities are a little less glamorous than the story. But it's beginning to look a lot like most of the fascia stories are going down this sort of same route. Be careful what you believe in. So let me know what you think. Am I spot on? See what I did there? Or are you purple with rage? Anyway, put your comments below and please, please, please hit the subscribe button, like and share. Do those things we're supposed to do on social media. Head on over to functionalanatomy.com and check out all the content that's there. And I will see you next time.